Have you ever noticed how hard it's become to just say something clearly, without getting pushback? Not because you're wrong. Not because you're being rude. But simply because you dared to define something. Somewhere along the way, we started treating clarity like a problem. Like if you say, this is what this means, or this is right and this is wrong, suddenly you're labeled as narrow-minded, or worse, intolerant. And look, being open-minded is important. It's how we grow. It's how we understand different perspectives, cultures, and experiences. But there's a point where open-mindedness stops being helpful, and starts making everything unnecessarily complicated. That's the point I think we've crossed. We've leaned so far into subjectivity, the idea that everything is based on personal interpretation, that we've started to lose our grip on things that are actually objective. And that's not just confusing. It can become dangerous. Let me explain. Subjectivity, at its core, means that something depends on personal feelings, opinions, or perspectives. Your favorite food is subjective. Your taste in music is subjective. Whether you like rainy days or sunny days, that's subjective. And that's fine. That's normal. But not everything falls into that category. Some things are objective. Meaning, they're true regardless of how anyone feels about them. The problem is, we've started treating objective things like they're subjective. And once you blur that line, things start to fall apart. Because if everything is up for interpretation, then nothing is grounded anymore. Let's take a simple example. Imagine someone says, this is a chair. Now, in a normal conversation, that's not controversial. A chair has a function. It's something designed to be sat on. There's a general, shared understanding of what a chair is. But now imagine someone responds, well, that's your interpretation of a chair. At first, that might sound harmless, even thoughtful. But think about where that logic goes. If we can't agree on basic definitions, how do we communicate at all? Language itself depends on shared meaning. Without that, every conversation turns into confusion. Now scale that up. Because this doesn't just happen with harmless things like chairs or colors or preferences. This mindset starts creeping into more serious areas. And that's where it becomes a problem. Let's talk about something heavier. What if good and evil are treated as purely subjective? If good just means whatever someone personally feels is right, and evil is just a matter of opinion, then what happens? Suddenly, harmful actions can be justified based on perspective. Someone could say, well, from my point of view, what I did wasn't wrong. And if we fully commit to extreme subjectivity, it becomes very difficult to challenge that. Because who are you to say otherwise, right? Do you see the issue? A society that can't agree on basic moral boundaries is a society that struggles to function. This doesn't mean every moral question is simple or black and white. Of course there are gray areas. Of course context matters. But acknowledging complexity is different from abandoning standards altogether. Now let's take another example. What if age were treated as subjective? At first, that might sound absurd. Age is measurable. It's based on time. It's not something you can just reinterpret based on how you feel. But follow the logic of extreme subjectivity, and you start to see how even something like that could be questioned. If someone says, I don't identify with my age, and we're told that all interpretations are equally valid, where do we draw the line? Because age isn't just a number in a vacuum. It's tied to responsibility, development, consent, and legal protections. If we start treating something like that as flexible or open to interpretation, the consequences aren't just philosophical. They're real. They affect people's safety. And this is what people mean when they say it's a slippery slope. Not in a dramatic, exaggerated way, but in a very practical sense. When you remove clear boundaries in one area, it becomes easier to question boundaries in others. And over time, things that were once obviously wrong, start getting pulled into this gray area. Not because they suddenly became okay, but because we've lost the confidence to say they're not. And here's the frustrating part. When you try to push back on this, when you say, no, some things are actually objective, you're often painted as the problem. You're told you're not open-minded enough. That you're too rigid. That you're not considering other perspectives. But there's a difference between being open-minded, and being so open that you lose your ability to stand for anything. If everything is equally valid, then nothing has weight. And that's not progress. That's confusion. We need a balance. We need room for subjectivity, because human experience is diverse, and not everything can or should be reduced to rigid definitions. But we also need to recognize that some things require clarity. Some things require shared agreement. Some things require us to say, this is true, or this is not acceptable. Without that, we don't just become more open-minded. We become unanchored. And being unanchored might feel freeing at first, but over time, it makes it harder to navigate reality. Because if there's no stable ground, every step becomes uncertain. So what's the solution? It's not about rejecting subjectivity entirely. It's about putting it in the right place. Recognizing that personal perspectives matter, but they don't override everything. Understanding that some truths are shaped by experience, while others exist independently of it. And maybe most importantly, having the courage to draw lines when they're necessary. Not out of arrogance. Not out of a desire to control others. But out of a recognition that clarity isn't the enemy. It's what allows us to function, communicate, and protect what matters. Because at the end of the day, a world where nothing can be clearly defined, isn't a more enlightened world. It's just a more confusing one. And confusion doesn't lead to progress. It leads to hesitation, conflict, and instability. So yes, be open-minded. Listen to different perspectives. Challenge your assumptions. But don't lose sight of the fact that some things are grounded in reality, whether we like it or not. Because once we start treating everything as subjective, we don't just blur the lines. We erase them. And when that happens, we don't get more freedom. We lose direction. And that's a much bigger problem than simply disagreeing about definitions.